I thought I would do today is do a couple of different things live. I got a new microphone, and I hope somebody out there will be able to perhaps let me know if it's working better. Let me turn down my monitor here. I brought up all of the links and tabs that I had used in previous videos, and if anyone out there had a question about, one second, there we go, about specific ways that they could respond if they were confronted with this false narrative, this he's a dictator, or why is he starving his people, or why is he refusing to let aid in. I have all of that information up in tabs, and I can show you how to respond to people. And of course, any input on the sound would also be great. I got this new smartphone microphone from Comica, C-O-M-I-C-A, and I had seen quite a few people saying that the sound wasn't good and they couldn't hear me. So I've downloaded a couple of different apps and am trying to do what I can to increase the sound quality so that people can hear. The reason I do the videos the way that I do them is so that it's more focused on the information than it is me. A lot of YouTube news personalities, they like to turn the camera around and focus it on them, and I've just wanted to maybe fix that. Thank you. The sound is cracking. Is this better if I'm back a little farther? Well, anyway, I'll keep talking and see if this fixes the issue. Not sure about the quality of the mic, but I'm only about 4 inches away from it. I was used to having to be very, very close to the smartphone and kind of look around it to see what was on the screen, so not much different. Okay, well, most people will say the sound is fine, but every now and then, and it seemed to have gotten more prevalent lately, people were saying they couldn't hear what I was saying. So I've tried to talk at different points around the camera, different points around the mic. But yeah, if anybody has any questions about this issue in Venezuela, I've brought up all of the different tabs, all of the different charts. And like this one, for example, this is the GDP in billions under Hugo Chavez. That, unlike what the U.S. would have you believe, when Hugo Chavez, Nicolas Maduro, they took over, they didn't ruin the economy. In fact, they quadrupled the GDP from 1998 to 2008. That's just fact. And a lot of that had to do with the increase in oil prices. And I am watching the live chat over here to the right. I have my phone set up to watch it while I'm recording here, so if anybody has any specific questions, a wire loose. Okay, I've got them in as tight as they can be. Might just be a cheap mic. I mean, it wasn't cheap, believe me, but it's the technology end of this is not really my forte. It's probably just a lot the way that I do videos versus aiming the camera at myself. The reason I don't do I think he was given cancer? You know, I've heard a couple of different things. He was cancer and there was a tumor, and he had gone to Cuba for treatment, and you know, it wouldn't surprise me, given that, why do I hate America? I love the American people. I despise the government in D.C. Okay, that's a big misnomer. I don't hate America. There's a very big difference between the people out here and what they refer to as the flyover states and the folks that are within the Beltway in Washington, D.C., that like to call themselves the people of America. They like to represent themselves as if they represent all of us, but they don't. They've chosen two specific parties, the RNC and the DNC, and they are the ones that are controlling everything. The problem that I think a lot of people don't realize is, and the reason I talk about the Electoral College this way, is prior to 1950, electors that went to the Electoral College meeting to choose the president, they were not assigned to parties. A lot of people don't get that. We watch this stuff on the news today about the electors assigned to this party, electors assigned to that party. Prior to 1950, that didn't exist. Now, there were Republicans and Democrats in existence at that time, but the electors that were chosen to go represent the states at the Electoral College meeting were not assigned to those parties. It's only been since then because that the RNC and the DNC have created these faithless elector laws and all of this crap to maintain their vice grip on control in Washington, D.C. And they're the ones that are running our government right now. We're really not being run the way that our founding fathers intended. And if anybody thinks differently about my feelings about I served my country, I didn't always agree with the orders I was given. You know, it's just what you have to do in the military, whether you're, you know, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, you follow orders. Doesn't mean those orders were always right. And there's also something that comes with age. And it comes with time that you look back at things and you wish you could have done things differently. But, you know, I look at the young 18, 19, 20, 21-year-olds right now, and they are getting so brainwashed as to who the good guys are and who the bad guys are. It's a kind of something that when you're younger, it's an easy thing to do. You always want to see the world as black and white, especially in the military. You don't really have an option that way. It's only when you get some, you know, years behind you that you are able to say, well, wait a minute, maybe these, you know, evil, terrible, horrible people weren't as evil, terrible, and horrible as we were made out to believe. Let's see here. I've used this chart a lot, and one of the reasons that I use it is because it goes to a psychological operations technique known as causation correlation. And what that means is sometimes people see two events happening together at the same time, and they want to make one be the cause of the other. Like, for example, when we look at this chart, over here, 2014 to the right, we see that Nicolas Maduro takes over, and all of a sudden the country goes to hell. Well, if that's just the only thing, two things that are happening in the world, then maybe. But there's a lot more going on that caused the cratering of the price of oil. So many things, the sanctions, the withholding of billions of dollars of Venezuelan funds that were earned through Citgo. Many people don't know that Citgo is owned by Venezuela. It's a, can I talk about the ELN? All right, the ELN stands for Ejército de Liberación Nacional. They are a, what is in South America referred to as a left-wing paramilitary. Now, left-wing, right-wing up here is very different than left-wing, right-wing down there. When I say left-wing, these aren't people that are pro-abortion, progressive, gay rights types. They're not. Okay, they're very pro-gun. They're very socially conservative, and they stood up as a response to basically United Fruit Company and others that went down there, large American corporations that went down there in the 50s and basically reinstituted slavery in a place where they didn't have to worry about these pesky U.S. laws and having to protect workers. And what happened is they started running the indigenous people off of their lands in Colombia and Venezuela and different places down there. Primarily in Colombia. That's where the ELN started. And so these left-wing paramilitaries stood up and... Okay, somebody said I'm breaking up. Sorry. Is this better? All right, I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to ditch this mic. Okay, is that better? Too loud? See, I get this thing now where people are like, it's too loud, it's too soft, it's too loud, it's too soft. But real quick on the ELN, basically they were set up as they were the response of the people. They wanted to have a military force that could hit back at the highly paid, well-trained military forces that were being employed by big U.S. business in Colombia. They were down there making these enormous plantations, and nobody knew what was going on, and they were treating these people like slaves and running people off of their land. And they were using people in Colombia to do it. Chiquita, Dole, Delmani. This is what the ELN is. The FARC, the ELN, those evil, terrible, horrible left-wing paramilitaries. You know, one thing that I think a lot of people would be surprised at, the right wing in South America, the true right wing, they do not believe in one man, one vote. They do not believe in the concept of just everybody having a single vote. They believe that you should be making a certain amount of money, that you should be of a certain education level, of a certain race. This is what the right wing in South America believes. So this is the differences between, and I'm not alleging that the right wing in North America believes that. That's totally the opposite. Both the left and the right wing in North America believe one man, one vote, but that's not the case down there. Another big difference between the right wing in North America and the right wing in South America is the right wing in South America is very pro-Catholic, very staunchly in bed with the Pope. Anything else is just not accepted. You know, what we would call Protestantism, all of the different Methodist, Pentecostal, Baptist denominations. Those are all things that the right wing in South America does not like. Another thing the right wing in South America doesn't like is gun rights. And we've just seen a lot of different pieces of legislation go through our government that restricts gun rights. Another big mistake that people make is they think Venezuela has been disarmed. That's absolutely not true. Not true at all that the Venezuelans are disarmed. You just have to be a member of the militia. You have to be a trained member of the colectivos, and submit yourself for training. Our Constitution says that it starts the Second Amendment that for the necessity of the security of a free state, a well-regulated militia being necessary. That's the point. That was the entire point of the Second Amendment, was the militia. That's why the first sentence talks about it. It wasn't about people protecting their private property. That was just a secondary type of thing. So, anyway, I'm just here to answer questions about, I won't answer super personal questions, but I will answer questions, anything about Venezuela, anything about the situation in South America, please. I have all the tabs up, and I can tell you how to respond to anyone. Dictators don't stand for elections. They absolutely do not. Nicolas Maduro has won 2. And if the U.S. government and the MSM wants to make the allegation that the election was fraudulent or it was fixed, then they need to, A, go down and observe like they were invited to, or B, they need to take it up with the Carter Center. Now, I know a lot of you aren't real giant fans of Jimmy Carter or the Carter Center, but they are the gold standard in election observations. And they observe elections around the world. And the opposition, the people that were against Nicolas Maduro, begged the UN not to observe these last elections so that they could call them fraudulent. That's the problem here with the U.S.'s story about the reason they stood up a random guy named Juan. How can you say that the election was fraudulent, therefore you need to recognize this other guy? If you didn't observe the election, no one other than you is alleging it was fraudulent. And if the election results had been starkly different than previous elections, then maybe you could say that. But look at the history of elections down there since 1998. One of the things that most people don't understand about Hugo Chavez and when he came to power, and I really need to report on something besides Venezuela, please. Okay, I'll cover that real quick. The reason I don't is there's a lot of news channels out here that'll just start talking about everything, taking their information and making it derivative. I've never served in the Middle East. I don't know the first thing about the Middle East. Was never on the ground there. Could not speak as anyone with any level of authority there. I don't know anything about Asia. The only reason I talked about the Fitzgerald was because I know a little bit about how military investigations go, having been trained in them. And when Admiral O'Quinn came out and started the press conference literally a day after, that's just not policy. So, and and like I said, I'm former Army, I'm not former Navy. I had to do a lot of study about how Navy systems work. So, let's see, what's the chances of a military draft happening if the U.S. goes to war in Venezuela? Almost zero. Military draft would mean we would have a shortage of troops of specific types, and any event that happens in Venezuela is not going to be something just not as a result of Venezuela, for sure. So, like I said, I suppose anything would happen, but for the U.S. to start mandating service and bringing people into training against their will, I could see them calling up reservists that are maybe older that used to serve and changing the maximum age. Anyone else have lousy sound? Katie King. This is what I started talking about. I got this new microphone and I have been attempting to try to fix the sound. It's muffled. I'm going to unplug this mic real quick and I want everyone to tell me if it fixes things. Okay, is that better? Is the sound better? Okay. All right, I'm just going to go ahead and ditch that mic and do it how I normally do it. Okay, my apologies for that. I've just been trying to fix problems people said they couldn't hear. And a lot of the information, a lot of the way that I do videos, it's about the audio, it's about the information, not about me specifically. So yeah, almost no chance of a draft. I can't imagine. I mean, not simply regarding Venezuela. The problem in Venezuela, going to war with Venezuela, is this. Those jungles make operations so difficult. All of the electronics advantage we have goes away. Because as bad as the dust storms were over in Iraq, what's my opinion on the situation in Nicaragua? It is parallel with Venezuela. We have a lot of history, unfortunately. And I'm not saying that all of the people down there in the governments are angels. There's a lot of corruption down there, and there's a lot of bad guys. But do understand, if corruption is the standard by which we judge countries to be invaded, we should be first on the list. Brazil. How do you see Brazil and the rest of the SA South responding? They're starting to kind of get the idea right now. The vice president of Brazil said absolutely no military intervention. At least they won't allow the U.S. to invade from their territory. They know. They absolutely know that the closer we push to military intervention, the more South American nations will side with Venezuela. That's going to be the case, and that's the problem the U.S. will face. That's what made what happened this last weekend such a big deal. Because even saying that they were going to force this aid in at the behest of this random guy named Juan, and having it fail so miserably, so horribly, and then having there be video to completely refute and completely debunk everything the United States and, Washington, D.C. has tried to put out. Do I have data on the Venezuelan population crossing to Guyana compared to Colombia fleeing to Venezuela? Not directly to Guyana per se, but I will tell you this: more Colombians fled to Venezuela over the previous decade and a half than Venezuelans have left to Colombia. The problem is China no one's really gone. Military aircraft. Univision coverage of... Okay, even if that were the case, man-eating from garbage trucks, we have that here. I'm glad you brought that up. It's what they call anecdotal evidence. It's where they take a picture or a couple of pictures that show people that are either starving or homeless or having problems in their life, and then they try to make you believe the entire country of 30 million people is having that exact same problem. Did I show that? Oh, the aid truck with the roses? Yeah, I saw that. I was going to cover it, but I thought, nah. India and Pakistan providing nuclear war scrum screen. Behind the scenes action from the U.S. while eyeballs. Wonderful thing about the internet, no eyeballs are ever diverted anywhere for very long. On the front page of any major news organizations today, but believe me, there's pictures of starving people all over the world. And every time I have shown large groups of Venezuelans who are protesting the government, large groups of Venezuelans who are wanting the overthrow of Nicolas Maduro, none of them look like they are starving. It is only these anecdotal pictures that the U.S., the DC wants you to believe. And it's a psychological operations tactic. I'm bringing this up on the screen just so that we can, stay on focus. Correlation causation means just because you see a thing, mean that B is the result of it. And exactly right. Are you aware? Nails and wire in food trucks. Absolutely. Absolutely. Here's the thing. If everything DC and random guy named Juan and these opposition people were saying, if that were all true, DC wouldn't have to even be involved. They would have already overthrown the guy. There would have been the millions and millions of people surrounding the military bases. The military would have already defected. There would be daily riots in the streets. Not just these organized, coordinated, every other weekend type of things that the MSM puts on the screen. Nicolas Maduro, socialism, and Hugo Chavez did not ruin the economy of Venezuela. Fact. And that's provable. And that's one of the reasons that I'm here. If anybody has a problem stating that and then using facts to back it up, I have those up right here in front of me on the tabs. I can show you why the price of oil collapsed. Yeah, well, old enough to remember Nicaragua. Well, I was Operation Just Cause when we went down and deposed Noriega. So, do you think Brazil's response changes DC's plans? Probably not. I think DC had plan A, plan B, plan C. They are going to continue to do everything they can to try to foment insurrection inside that country. This chart here I brought up is the price of oil, starting over here all the way to the left in 2008 and ending over here in 2016. And this first big drop is when we had our collapse in 2008, when capitalism failed. And it didn't really affect them all that much, but they were able to go to banks, get loans, and maintain and then pay them back. And then the price of oil went back up. Robert Hutton, do you think they will go in at some point for some reason? Yes. Okay, I know 100 of Latin Americans living in USA that will have something to say about any intervention in Venezuela. I get that for sure. But here, in 2014, all the way to the right, when this collapse in oil happened, it was coordinated. And Lancelot Dufresne, it can't be. In fact, it's part of the UN Charter that any aid must be authorized and inspected by the country requesting it. What was DC's initial excuse for laying sanctions against Venezuela? Corruption, initially. And that's partially true. There are people in Venezuela, the big business folks, that have used Miami basically as their personal piggy bank. And they started sanctioning members of the government, definitely not making the allegation that there are not people in the government that have been tied to different corrupt events, money laundering and different things, drugs. Absolutely. In fact, and it was a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation. When Chavez came in, he tried to wholesale fire all of these people, but he couldn't run the government with nobody. And that was one of the arguments against the thing in PDVSA, why Maduro put the military in charge of the state-run oil company, is because the people were all corrupt. They were all criminals. And so he would rather have people he could trust that maybe weren't very good at running an oil company than corrupt people who were really good at it. So it's damned if you do, damned if you don't. You leave the corrupt people in, and then you get charged with corruption for colluding with these people. You fire them, you get rid of them, and you put people in that aren't as good, and then you get labeled a mismanager. This is the game that Washington, D.C. has been playing with both Maduro and Chavez. Okay, how do I explain that sanctions on individual people like the VP affect the population? Okay, it's not those sanctions. There's lots and lots of sanctions. Okay, and here's the link right here. There are sanctions that prohibit any bank or any business from issuing any loan to anybody in Venezuela at all. It's not specific. That's the problem. Some of the sanctions are specific, yes, but of the vast majority are not. And go to www.state.gov or just Google Venezuela sanctions, and you'll find the state.gov list, and you can find the sanctions that prevent businesses and different countries from around the world from doing business with Venezuela. So I hope that helped, Liberty Cat. Geoengineering the weather in Venezuela, hard to say. If they do, it's In the sense that maybe they want to create. Venezuela has accepted aid from all sorts of countries, especially through the World Health Organization. There are all sorts of countries that have absolutely no problem getting aid into that country. It's the U.S. that has the problem. All right, geoengineering. DC's initial excuse, I think we covered that. As for Rob B, to what end? Are you talking about the sanctions? The sanctions were designed to, just like back with Allende back in the 70s, initially what DC wanted to have happen is the people of Venezuela to rise up and overthrow the government so that they weren't seen as doing it themselves. When that didn't happen, they had to really step up their game. Prepping and getting ready food and water a long time ago. 6 months minimum. Always. 6 months per person. And always more water than you think. Yeah, and I did that on a purpose the middle of the day week because just to keep the trolls away. How to prep most effectively? Boy, it depends on your situation, where you are, how many people you're prepping for. The rules for prepping in Michigan are definitely different than the rules for prepping in Florida. Well, I would, as far as papal nobility goes, not Venezuela. The, I'm going to guess this issue with India and Pakistan is probably going to blow over. They've had these events over the years where they get real angry at each other. Everybody calms down. Everybody says, both sides goes back to their own people and says, we won, and then it goes away again. Now, that having been said, anything can happen, but I don't very much see this getting much worse. How is this going to affect the average American? Why prep and do all that? In Florida, everybody preps to some extent because of the hurricanes. You always want to have the water. You always want to have the batteries. So it's hard to give out generic advice. And I can tell you what works here. The reason with Venezuela that it's relevant to the average American, we import a lot of oil. And cutting off that oil supply is going to affect us long term, especially when now other countries like India are stepping up, like the other commenter said, and buying their oil. This is a lot of questions. The pseudo economy be able to sustain all of these interventions? Well, as long as we can continue to print magical money that turns into something valuable right as soon as it comes off the presses, or literally as soon as the keystrokes are done, I guess. It's hard to say. You see, that's the other thing too. I wish DC would, say, okay, let Venezuela play on the same field as DC does. Let Venezuelans print money like we do and print their way out of problems. Here's another thing too. Esther Taylor makes a really good thing. Look to the Amish. When our country stops seeing comfort and wealth and being well-to-do as the measuring stick for freedom or for success, then we will be back on the right road. If we were to ever go to 50 states governing themselves independently again, guaranteed there would be a lot of belt tightening. there would be a lot of people going by doing with less. Man spoke and died for idiots who are too brainwashed. I'm not sure which idiots, but um, it's it's a tough thing because to understand the issue in Venezuela, you've got to understand how different their economy is than ours. How will the issue with Cuba, Venezuela? Well, I tell you what, if it gets to the point where it really is an on the ground affair, quite a bit, quite a bit, because we're going to be on the front lines here in Florida. We have a lot of Venezuelans here in Florida, and not all of them are on the side of a random guy named Juan. You know, it's not as black and white a thing as you would think. Oh, Kennedy died for people who don't deserve it. Well, I'll tell you what, that is a video in and of itself. I don't really know how this would affect the Suez Canal. It might get busier if there's a problem with the Panama Canal. The issue with red tide is going away. It's still in some areas, but it's getting better. How fast will Russia and China act militarily against U.S. intervention, in my opinion? I don't think the Chinese, per se, will act militarily. I think they will make our life a living nightmare economically if we do that. But the Russians, I'll tell you what, I'll be very honest with you guys. I know a lot of people don't think it's the case. The Venezuelans don't need the Russians to fly their jets over here and defend them. They have a 2 million man armed militia that trains monthly, like our National Guard does. 2 million. That's not including their National Guard and their armed forces. We could shoot down every plane they have, absolutely. But that doesn't mean we're going to be able just to walk in there to Miraflores Palace and take over. On the ground, whole different game. Any idea why the sustained 24/7 helo ops off west coast of Florida? I'm on the east coast, so I wouldn't know, but could be part of it. What will take place with Cuba after Venezuela? I don't think India and Pakistan are related to this at all. It's a big world, and a lot of things happen at the same time. My faith in Venezuela is very clear. My understanding of them is probably better than some just because I served down there. And I would be saying this about any South American nation. If this for some reason were, let's say, Ecuador or Argentina or Chile, the people down there are very proud and very independent. A lot of people hear the word socialist and they think a bunch of lazy people laying on the couch waiting for their food stamps and wanting handouts. That is not the case. These people work hard every day. There's a great deal of entrepreneurial spirit down there. A great deal of people that just make it because they have the ability to. One of the things that kept Venezuela going during this time has been cryptocurrency. I don't know how many of you are familiar with World of Warcraft Gold, but because of the way the electricity is free down there, they have people down there that are getting online and playing Warcraft 12 and 14 hours a day just to earn the Warcraft Gold to turn into US dollars. US move against Cuba. We have a base at on the island of Cuba. So it's oh, there went that. Sorry about that. 1 second. All right. Here is one of the more popular links that I'd used. It's about why did the income to Venezuela collapse in 2014? What made it so that they did not have the ability to pay their bills. Well, it had to do with the drop in the price of oil that the U.S. engineered with the Saudis. There was declining demand around the world, and when we should have been cutting production, we glutted the market with oil, driving the price of it down. Okay, Gypsy Stargirl, how can we help stop this? There's nothing we can do to stop the events, but we can educate. Well, I guess we can educate the American people so that public opinion can rise up against any action. If they're going to do it against our opinion, then that's how they're going to have to do it, but they won't do it with people being in the dark. Yes, and they were sanctioned. When you add in the collapse in the price of oil, when you add in the sanctions, and then you add in Colombia and the paramilitaries. What type of, we've got some small handheld radios, walkie-talkie types, the long distance, the 2-mile ones. One of the more important things when shit hits the fan is to not really put yourself at distance from your group. There's no reason to. If you've prepped properly, standing fast, having the ability to leave if you need to, but the smartest thing you can do is just mark time march and just keep your eyes and ears open. Just trying to see if I missed any questions here. You know, some people have said that the only reason Russia is worried about its money. It's absolutely not. Okay, what do troops do? They have to follow orders? Well, yeah, if they're good. Good soldiers, that is. Well, they dropped the price of oil to screw Russia, yes, and a lot of other countries at the same time. Let me find that tab. I'm glad you asked that. Okay, here it is. This is world's top exports. I just want to, real quick, I'm going to get to your questions. I'm just going to show this real quick to the folks. 2017, of these top 15 exporters, I want everyone to listen to this. Only 2 of these top 15 exporters increased the value of their crude oil shipments from 2013 to 2017, meaning all of these, Saudi Arabia, Russia, all of these lost money big time in that era when the U.S. collapsed oil prices. The only 2 were the U.S. and Iraq. The U.S. increased the value of its exports 328%. While, listen to this, while all of the others lost, Venezuela lost 70%, Nigeria lost 55%, Canada lost 32%, Iran 14.5%, Saudi Arabia lost 54.5%, Kazakhstan 53.6%, Angola lost 53.4%, Mexico lost 52.1%. All of the major oil exporting countries in the world during this time got clobbered. Why did Venezuela continue to spiral? They weren't allowed to go get loans to cover the difference. And that's the difference here. And Venezuela at one time was the number 3 in the world exporter of oil. And it's not the fault of Hugo Chavez and socialism that collapsed that. It was the U.S. Venezuela is part of the imperialist quest to own this continent, right? The continent meaning South America. I don't think they want to own it. I just think they want to control it. All right. A staging attack against Colombia, boy, they would have to really make a that would be the false flag of all false flags if they could somehow tie Venezuela to some attack in Colombia. There have been little tiny skirmish attacks across that border between Colombia and Venezuela, oil pipelines for a long time, but I'm not sure that NATO would draw down over something like that. Okay, Anon. Goldman Sachs. That's a excellent thing. They were allowed to. They were the one exception to the sanctions. Oddly enough, the former company of our current Secretary of the Treasury, Steve Mnuchin, was allowed to issue what they called hunger bonds to Venezuela, and they made a mint. What is Cuba's real part in this mess? Is it that the CIA is willing to topple them too? The story in Cuba, believe it or not, goes back to the 1790s. And I wish I had that link. That whole story in the region about wanting to control these islands, this part of the hemisphere, and bring them under U.S. hegemony, it's long, and it's so many different events. It goes back to slavery. It goes back to the reason that you see Russia having interest in a lot of these places is because of the way U.S. business and U.S. corporations, not the people of the United States per se, have treated those people. They've treated them like slaves. Yep, Canada for sure. Thank you, Max Yu. I very much appreciate that. Why didn't the U.S. allow Venezuela to self-implode via economic sanctions and the crisis it has caused? Well, that's the thing. They wanted that to happen. But what they didn't count on was the Chinese and the Russians saying, no, we're not going to allow the U.S. to destroy this country. And they were very resilient people. These colectivos, they stood up. They started basically growing food for themselves as opposed to importing it. That was the cause of the food shortages. It was imported food. Yes, Benjamin Netanyahu will be taken to court. Stole their gold as well? Absolutely. All right, question. Who is Maxim Sushenko, president? Okay, don't know. I'll look that up, and I'm sure there's folks out there that know a lot more about that than me. Russia and China have been, if you watch the Security Council meeting, I think it was yesterday or the day before, the Russian representative absolutely eviscerated Washington, D.C. in its narrative. I mean, literally took him down point by point by point. Jorge Ariatza was there. And China has, for the most part, done what they're supposed to do. You know, they've extended billions and billions in loans. And they know that the DC is failing. They don't need to be seen as overstepping, because believe it or not, the Chinese respect Venezuela's sovereignty more than we do. All right. Military intelligence agencies and from what branch and country were working at Jonestown? That's a good question. The history of Cuba-America relations link? Yes, Liberty Cat. I'm sorry, guys. I know I'm way behind here. Just going through and scrolling while I'm talking. Well, Gypsy Stargirl, how can U.S. keep multiple attacking countries? Because a lot of the attacks that we do they use drones, they use what they call force multiplying assets. We don't have to invade with thousands and thousands and thousands like we used to. No, I am not Venezuelan. My initial, and I'm glad somebody asked that about why do I cover this. My initial thought when the story broke years ago about the starvation issue in Venezuela was Panama. The Panama Canal, believe it or not, and the reason I brought this up today is I was hoping somebody would ask. The state-run oil company, PDVSA, from Venezuela, provides the tugboats, the big, heavy-duty tugboats that are needed to pull the big natural gas ships through the new improved side of the Panama Canal. They're the only outside contractor that Panama uses. It's very important in the sense that U.S. exports of natural gas are slaved to that. If the Venezuelans wanted to turn the screws on the U.S., they could just recall that fleet of tugs and say, nope, sorry. Yes, Dash is amazing. It really is. I can't wait till we get something like that here. Do I believe it'll escalate before the year is out, Lone Ranger? I can't imagine it not escalating. Yes, isn't it strange how the left is all for intervention? Because, once again, they are just as much of a slave to the MSM as the mind-numbed idiots that watch Fox are. They hear the term dictator and they automatically want to believe. Yes, that's another good thing, Elizabeth Gonzalez. Bolivarian is a term used to describe the revolution in Venezuela and their military. Bolivian, from the country of Bolivia, that country is named for Simon Bolivar, but that's a very different group of people. Not very different, but geographically, a whole nother place. Do you really think the people of the United States do not want another war? I think that DC does. I think DC would absolutely love a war in South America to take away from all of the things going on domestically. Yes, Gypsy Star Girl, the problem that we are facing, the biggest domestic problem faced by the American people, is the RNC and the DNC. Alexander Mayer, do you think leaders realize their actions are disastrous for the future of the U.S.? Are they in denial? Yes, because they live inside the Beltway. They're some of the wealthiest people on the planet, and they have gold parachutes. And they're just arrogant enough to think that they really don't care what happens to us, to be truthful. Tugboat situation. If Venezuela stops the tugs and sanctions an act of war, no, that wouldn't be an act of war. The Venezuelans can pull their... You see, the Venezuelans have that relationship with the country of Panama. They don't do that as a favor to the United States. It just happens to be a favor to the United States. So, that's up to the Panamanians. And believe me, the Venezuela PDVSA is very well paid for those tugs. So they probably wouldn't want to lose the income. Both sides support the military-industrial complex. When it furthers their ends, it does, absolutely. Conflict on our soil? Boy, there would have to be a lot of different events that all came together. Robert Ellis, Venezuela is mostly Catholic. How are all the problems with the church affecting the population down there? I'm going to say this, and I'm probably going to get a lot of pushback. Their version of Catholicism versus the North American version of Catholicism is very, very different. I'm not saying they're not going to be affected, but if you wanted to ever visit a place, especially out in the Campesino areas, that was a Christian country like we were, this is the place to be, Catholic or not. They still believe in the Sabbath. They still believe in tithing. They still believe in a great many things that we haven't seen in this country for a long time. The truth about the Fitzgerald will never be told. I promise you that. Not in our lifetime. Right. Ray Keller, great point. Dictator with a female vice president. Pretty amazing, huh? And before that, it was a Syrian. You know, this idea of dictator, Cale Berlin, about wishing to fight against dictators. You know, this whole Boris Badenoff, guys with dark mustaches are always dictators thing. It just goes to the shallowness of the American people and people wanting to believe something, that these people over here are all bad and we're over here and we're all good. Hello, Lena Romero. How do I think Europe could be affected by such a war? Well, I tell you what, that the U.S. would draw a lot of their allies into something, the after effects could be very damaging, because Venezuela has historically had very good relations with many European countries. Intelligence agencies messing with me considering you are affecting things worldwide. They would probably see me as just one of those elements in social media that they just need to work around. Not a direct threat. Never have been a direct threat. What do you believe Buzz was talking about when he made that tweet about Antarctica? We're going to get to that here once this thing with Venezuela settles down. Would there be anti-war protesters? Oh boy, I tell you what, 2020 election coming up? Absolutely. You know, Venezuela, I'm talking to chaos theory here, practicing Santeria and witchcraft. We have that here. We have that. In fact, we have more of it here. Rubio's done. I promise you this. Rubio is done. Take heat when re-election. He is, believe me, the people of Florida are livid by his actions. Even if there was Hamas in Venezuela, who's responsible for that? We are. We are. We could have reached out to Hugo Chavez. We could have reached out to these people and we could have said, you know what? We don't agree with this. We don't agree with that. But we are going to work with you. We're going to focus on the things that we do agree on. And we're going to build up those strengths. And we're not going to allow our big business to go down there and treat your people like slaves. But we didn't. You know, using Denise J, random guy, as a patsy, it would serve U.S. interest, D.C. interest, to have that guy be assassinated or killed, absolutely. Because, of course, they'd be able to blame it on. In fact, I could see Venezuela, the government of Venezuela, wanting to secure him just so there isn't one of these false flag assassinations. Brazil's perfectly fine, Frizzo 1015. Sao Paulo's beautiful. How old am I? Around 50, that's all I'm going to say. The romanticizing of wealth is a problem, absolutely. Katie Kane. Thank you, JLB7. You know, Iran-Contra, all that thing that happened was totally put under the shelf when everything blew up in the Middle East. I have tried, you know, this, speaking to JT here, Amazing how 5-minute conversation about South American history really opens up eyes. Can you put together a video that we can drop on our brainwashed friends and family? I thought that's what pretty much most of my videos were. I've really tried to cover all of the elements, but I will try to find that link, the history of Cuban-American relations. Believe me, it's telling. Lena Romero, Tulsi 2020. Regardless of what that girl says, if it has a D by its name or an R by its name, it's part of the problem. So don't vote for D, don't vote for R, and if they're the only ones available, then exercise your right to an abstention. U.S. spreading itself too thin? I think we're past that point. Just reading through the comments here. What percentage of the Venezuelan population is conscious of the full scope of who is to blame for their situation? Not enough. That's the problem, Jay. Not enough. A good portion of their population is indigenous personnel, and a lot of them don't read and write. A lot of them just know what they're told. Have I ever worked at an interrogation center? I was a United States Army interrogator at the time. They weren't really centers. We were just attached to different units. Genocide in Venezuela if war breaks out. Well, I'll tell you what, if it would actually be something where it might be our troops would have a target on their back wherever they went, there would be no place they would be safe. Not even in their own barracks. Not even in Colombia. I can't imagine. They wouldn't be safe in Brazil. They wouldn't be safe anywhere but on a ship offshore. Thank you, everyone, by the way, for all of the $5. I very much appreciate that. Well, thank you for sounding young. It must be the fountain of youth here in Florida. I didn't mean to invent random guy named Juan, but literally that's how they picked him. He was a member of the National Assembly, and they just all got together one day and decided, okay, this guy's going to be our leader. Show of hands. Okay, yeah, Tammy Brennan. Grocery stores no longer stocked food. In a few hours, it would be cleaned out. That happened a lot in Venezuela. That kind of exacerbated, people hoarded because one had shortages. And then people would go to get stuff. They would exacerbate it and make it worse and make it worse and make it worse. Haiti has U.S. mercs on the ground. Well, U.S. mercenaries find themselves in a lot of third world nations just because they can get in and get out. It's real easy to buy your way in and buy your way out and not really be on the radar. That's one of the things about being a mercenary, is being covert. Okay, chaos theory. Military standpoint, kick Russia and China out of our hemisphere. Not going to happen. There's more Russia and China in the United States than there is in South America. Before they start building bases and amass troops, there is a huge Chinese base in Argentina, a U.S. ally. Massive base down in southern Argentina, and we've covered it. $50 a barrel shuts down the tar sands in Canada. Yep, absolutely. Thank you, Lich Gore, for the $5. I very much appreciate it. Thank you for the singing compliment. The only reason I ever started using YouTube to begin with was that. And if I had my way about it, that's all I would have ever done. Sorry about the screen going black. 1 second. Let me catch up the, there we go. Just reading through the comments here. Venezuela, are you aware? A rifle behind every bush. Yeah, they are quite well armed. And yes, people of the United States would be targets overseas as well. Well, that's good for Hungary. Wonderful for Hungary. I'm glad they have their heads screwed on straight. Thank you for the $20. My goodness. Convert to diesel fuel. I would recommend that if anybody does have the ability to make the switch over between gasoline vehicles and diesel vehicles. Definitely have a diesel vehicle at your disposal. Mainly because if there were ever a shortage, ever a problem, that the DC, the folks in charge, would make sure the diesel fuel was flowing to keep the trucks going down the road. And a lot of those guys have fleet cards, and I'm sure they could be probably bribed to use their fleet card to get you fuel if you needed it. Why are we not addressing the issue in Haiti more? Lori Solowoda Trong. Because it's an ongoing issue in Haiti. Topic of abstention. Yeah, you know what? A lot of folks in America don't understand what quorum is and what abstention does and how that's related to this thing called voting present. And believe me, this big lie put out by the MSM every election cycle that says, if you don't vote, you're not participating and you can't say, is absolute bullshit. Not participating means that you are affecting quorum, that you are making the statement that you do not represent my interests, therefore I'm not going to validate the process. Yes, look at how much land China owns in the U.S. When do I think they'll shut the Panama Canal down? When it's not usable. Believe me, that's the only way they'll shut it down. I have not tracked those vessels. I should probably look at that. Yes, Katie Kane, China owns Smithfield Pork and all of the attending label brands with that. Well, you know what? That's up to the people of Haiti, isn't it? You know, if Russia had made the comment about there being a multipolar world, we should not have allies that are only our ally because we're their only option. We should let there be multiple options and have ourselves be the best one. Thank you, DXZ. I very much appreciate that. I just got down to your thing. I know I'm way behind on the comments, guys. I'm so sorry. Spanish can become a second language in non-Spanish nations. Well, I would hope that most nations would welcome any language. I would encourage everyone to speak as many as possible. Thank you, everyone, for all of your comments. I'm just trying to scroll through here and try to get to the questions. What I think of India and Pakistan, they go back and forth. We'll have to keep a very close eye on it. Will sympathetic Hispanic people in U.S. soil retaliate if war breaks out in Venezuela? Absolutely. That'll be a big unseen consequence. You know, I don't want Yvonne Walton, Florida Maquis compound. One of the things about being covert and being Maquis is not being found and not being labeled. Because the word Maquis, Maquis, literally translates into shrubbery. It was one of the most frustrating things when the Germans went to try to find these guys. They couldn't because they would disappear. And they would go out into these large areas full of mountains and shrubs, and they couldn't find them. All right, still catching up. Thank you, Richard Beanham. I very much appreciate it. Alrighty, it looks like I caught up on the comments. Pancho Villa, martial law happen in the U.S. Boy, tell you what, if it does, we're going to probably have a lot more to worry about than Venezuela. Okay. Alrighty. So real quick here, at the end, what I think I'm going to do is go over some of these links that I brought up just to give you guys the basic overview. All right. Nicolas Maduro, because he took over as president in 2014, did not cause this collapse. Socialism did not cause the problems in Venezuela, the food shortages in Venezuela. The food shortages that did exist were not the whole country. There, of course, were areas that were very bad, and they have had to deal with a lot of moving parts to overcome it. The reasons they've had to turn to Russia and turn to China is because of our sanctions. Why did the price of oil drop so precipitously in 2014 and 15 that caused this problem in Venezuela, them not being able to pay their bonds? When people say, well, Venezuela didn't pay its bills and it defaulted and all this stuff. It's because the U.S. created this problem. They colluded with the Saudis to crater the price of oil. The U.S. lifted its ban on oil exports, and when that happened, that created a huge problem, just like it would Business 101. The price of something is directly related to the amount of it available and what people are willing to pay. Fact. 1998 is when Chavez took over, and extreme poverty in that country went way down. Because instead of spending the money on the rich, he spent it on the people. He built houses. He educated people. He gave them access to free healthcare, free education. And they started becoming a first world country as a result of socialism. And as a result of people having more money to spend because they had living wages and real jobs, in 1998, their GDP went from 100 billion to almost 400 billion in 10 years. They quadrupled their GDP. This is the price of oil from 2008 here on the left to 2016. This was our collapse that nearly destroyed our country. And this is the collapse that caused the problems in Venezuela. Here are the sanctions. And when you look at when the sanctions started, they started in 2014. And I'll link all this when this video is done processing. I will, of course, put all these links in it, and you can find them and go find this for yourself. Another link for the sanctions. This is the psychological operations technique. It's called correlation causation. Just because Maduro took over in 14, and that's when the problems started happening, doesn't mean that Maduro caused the problems. A lot of other things happened in 14 as well. The bridge. Okay. This is one thing I haven't talked about today. This issue, trying to force the aid in. First of all, that bridge had never been opened. Now, this wasn't the bridge where they tried to force the aid in. But the reason, Nicolas Maduro, this is going to be a question you get asked a lot. Why did he refuse aid for his starving people? First of all, none of the aid, quote unquote, giant air quotes, had been inspected by anyone. And when it was finally inspected after it was on fire, it was found to have nails and barbed wire and all sorts of other things in it. Number two, the UN states specifically that when aid is given to a country, it has to be authorized by the leader of that country. Now, the U.S. is going to say that, well, Juan Guaido authorized it, but he's not the president. 70% of the world doesn't recognize him. He's never stood for an election. And if the U.S., D.C., really wanted them to have the aid, why didn't they just pull the trucks up to the border, leave the keys in the ignition, send a message saying, here's the trucks, here's the aid, have at it, and then everybody leave. And then let them come get it. Why didn't they do airdrops? Why didn't they use a ship? Why didn't they use the World Health Organization like the Russians and the Chinese and the Italians and the Turks and everybody else who's given aid to Venezuela has done? That's the problem. USAID is not the beginning and ending of all aid. And for those of you that want the information about the oil and the exports and why the U.S. did this, it's very simple. They want control of that supply of oil so that they can maintain their hegemony. The petrodollar is failing. So when you lose the control of the currency, you have to control the product. And that's the problem. So thank you, Lichgore, very much. Yeah, no kidding. Why no aid for our warriors here in the U.S.? Right. You can't force aid on a country. Rex Remedy, exactly right. All right. I think that covered pretty much all of the questions. Nerdworks, no, I'm not. I don't use Facebook very much. Oh, actually, but thank you for bringing up the Facebook. There is a Florida Maquis Facebook page. There are no friends. There are no likes. Once in a while, I'll share a video there. It is basically a placeholder so that people that are trying to find me personally can stop looking. It is an unfortunate thing that when you have an unpopular opinion like this, that people who disagree with it will come try to find you in real life personally and do you harm and do you damage and try to shut you up. So I've had to make a very specific provision to maintain anonymity. It's unfortunate. So don't think, and on that same thing, if you leave me your phone number or you ask for my email address or you talk about wanting to get together or anything like that, I just don't do it. I just do not do it. It's too risky. I've already had threats made to my family. I've already gone through a lot in real life regarding my opinion here online. And I don't mean it as an insult, but it's just too risky. So, and you guys remember that too, that having an unpopular opinion like this, especially when both the left and the right in this country disagree with you, you're going to be getting it from both sides. Liberty Cat, know the truth or accept the truth is two different things. At some point, there's not going to be any real totally safe place. People have made the allegation that my maps are backwards, that being toward the center of the country is safer, being in the Midwest is safer, being in the mountains is safer, being near food supplies. It really just depends. It's very specific. I think there are going to be extremely safe and extremely dangerous areas in all 50 states. So as far as the map issue goes, I don't. I really, the only thing, honestly, and this will be the only personal admission that I make, I have Facebook first to play Angry Birds. It's my release. It's my stress relief thing. And Angry Birds friends. And that's just the only thing I do. Once in a while, I'll share a video over there. Once in a while, I'll share it on Twitter. But as far as I've seen the weather brought up a lot in the comments here, Florida has had one of the coldest, longest winters we've had in a long time. I mean, for northern Florida, it was very cold, very rainy for a very long time. Number one, Matt Man, armed in an elevated position with lots of food and they can't burn you out is the safest place. Do you remember that scene from Predator where Jesse Ventura ain't got time to bleed? They'll find a way to get you. Once they know you're there, they'll find a way. The biggest offense that you can have is just people not knowing, is being very quiet about what you do and not advertising it on Facebook, not advertising it, period. Even training with weapons on your property is a risk. Do I think Russia is the safest? I think there's going to be places up in Siberia that are probably totally unaware of why they are safe. That's how far away they are from everything. See, where are we at here? 1 hour, 22 minutes, and 6 seconds. What do I think about the canal being dug through Lake Nicaragua? Well, I've heard a lot of different things about it. If it works out, it works out. But these shipping canals, they save time. But when you talk about what it does to the local environment and the people, there are certain people in Panama that are better off for the Panama Canal, but the vast majority of the indigenous are not. Is Iran next after Venezuela? 11 countries, 11 years? We've been going after Iran since before I was born, so hard to say. And once again, thank you to everyone for all the compliments. I appreciate it. Very best I can here. I know I don't have all of the answers, and with and I'll say this again, people that are going to confront you about this issue with Venezuela are going to want you to have this A or B, black or white answer. So when you start refuting their story, they're going to say, "Oh, so you think Venezuela is the greatest place to live? You should go live there, and that they're all innocent." No, absolutely not. The point is that they have problems like every other country has problems. They've just been targeted specifically by the United States for regime change. And by DC for regime change. And when DC targets you that way, there's very little you can do to avoid the suffering. So just make those people understand, look, everything that you're alleging in Venezuela as the reason exists elsewhere. Even if you accepted the dictator lie. What about the king of Saudi Arabia? What about this guy that just got reelected in Nigeria under extremely suspicious circumstances? He was just in the White House. Thank you, Mopi, very much. I appreciate that. Joe Valanza, thank you for saying that. I don't have it in front of me right now, but I thought they did too. There was a guy that was really pushing for it, and then the financing got screwed up and it all went away. Rex Remedy, excellent. Expect the unexpected. Very true. PCHDZ, start your own. That's the best way to do it. One thing I want to say about the 50 state thing. Let's imagine you're a country like China. People have said, well, we can't govern ourselves as 50 states because what if China attacks? What if Russia attacks? Put yourself in their position. Why would you? To what point and purpose? We're their best customers. Why would you want to go destroy a country that, or people that purchase your products? Let's say that you're the country of China and you want to deal directly with the people of Texas, for example. You know, the governor can set that up and you can deal directly with them. We don't need DC involved in that. And that deal doesn't affect any deal that China might make with, say, the people of Florida. We can have our own deal. And we can negotiate what's good for us as our own independent nations. And I know people think that makes us vulnerable. It absolutely doesn't. And you know what the proof of that is? Africa. Africa is this huge continent full of all of these different countries. And they are by far and away much more impoverished than we are, much less able to defend themselves than we are. And do we see China or Russia invading and taking over their countries and taking all of their natural resources? No. There is no giant boogeyman of a country waiting out there to invade the United States just because we don't have Washington, D.C. as a big brother. Independent states of America. I like the free North American Republic personally. But I don't even know that we have to have a name. Exactly. Mad Marv CR. Iowa should be able to negotiate its own deals. So should California. And that's the thing with people out there that have said, well, I don't want there to be states' rights because I don't agree with my particular governor. Really? Then move to another state if it's that big of a deal. And if there's a problem with your governor, it's a lot easier to vote out a governor. It doesn't affect the other 49 states. I mean, I've lived in a lot of different states myself, and it's not a hard thing. In fact, it's actually a good thing when people realize that, you know, they can take their money and take it elsewhere. That would be a great way to get rid of the Fed too. If we were able to stand up cryptocurrencies and stand up our own way of doing things, it would give us that unique thing we used to have. In fact, that reminds me of something. 13 colonies before the war, Revolutionary War. The southern states, South Carolina, North Carolina, they were getting along swimmingly with the crown. It was only the northern states that were having the problem. That's why they were very hesitant to join in. In fact, a lot of people say that the Second Amendment is so important because it's second. The Second Amendment was actually the last amendment. They just negotiated it up to the top. They didn't want to be drawn in, the Carolinas, to conflicts that were between places like Massachusetts and Rhode Island and other nations. They didn't see themselves as associated with them that way. The reason that they wanted the Second Amendment put in the Constitution is they weren't going to sign the Constitution without some guarantees that if they had to stand up their militia and send their militia to go defend Washington, D.C., that they were going to be left powerless. And that's what the Second Amendment was really about. That's why it starts with security of a free state. a well-regulated militia. They wanted the ability to say that we are independent, we are our own nation, we are sovereign, and that's Virginia, and that's North Carolina and South Carolina, and all the ones that follow. This idea of being just an administrative district of Washington, D.C. is ridiculous. And we see what's happened. We are now under tyranny. We are under direct tyranny by two groups that are the RNC and the DNC that are only distinct in the sense that if they were not two different ones, they could be seen as monopolizing the business. Just reading through some of the comments just to make sure that I'm still with you guys. Yes, corporate tyranny. There is a lot more tyranny here than in places that we call dictatorships. There really is, especially in Venezuela. That was something else that I brought up. One of the things that DC didn't like was OPEC acting like capitalists because they were colluding to drive up the price of oil. It was their thing. It's their oil. They're bringing it to market. Shouldn't they get the best price for it? Doesn't that make sense? But when they do that, all of a sudden, the capitalist United States, the big free market, all of a sudden they have a problem with the free market. And they want to use their military, speaking of DC, and their ability to criminalize things to affect the free market. That's what sanctions are. And it's, and on, say no to oil. The higher the price of oil would get, the higher price of gasoline would get, the more attractive other options become. And that's a problem too you have to look at. Because that's what only pain causes change. And I know a lot of people are like, well, wait a minute, are you saying that we should destroy our economy? No. But nothing is really going to change unless the current situation is so painful that people think anything else should be an option. There is no real capitalism on the whole globe anymore. It's gone. Well, you know what? When you can create money out of thin air, yeah. So much military power watching and some with forces present. How do you think it? It's kind of general, Mason. I'm not really sure specifically what that is. And I've made some references to Israel. This idea of running your country or even running your life based on greed, saying that a rising tide rises all boats, or that the unending pursuit of the promotion of self or wealth, if that's really the basis on which you're going to run a country, where do you think it's going to end up? People love to attack socialism, but what's the fundamental idea behind it? The well-being of all. Our tax system is based on Marx. I've never heard anyone who's supposedly a free market guy or a capitalist guy say that we should have, any different tax system than what we should, that somebody making $25,000 a year should pay the same amount of taxes as someone making $250,000 a year. But yet they call themselves capitalists. And they call themselves these free market folks when they really don't want that. If you want to see how the free market works when it's left alone, go to Africa. you end up with warlords and insanely wealthy people and vast throngs of poverty. Well, I think this, responding to Jacob JE125, the purpose of the South American tour, a random guy named Juan is making. Well, I think that he is trying to do what leaders do, but he's going to fail miserably if he thinks he's going to go into these countries and be treated like a president. Are there enough forces present to deter further violence, or will this turn to World War III potential? If you're talking about Mason Flamel, the thing with Venezuela, the more they recover, and they are recovering, and the better they get, the more DC loses. And the more we can report this, the less chance that they're going to have to sneak one by. Ramon Fiery Falcon, the UN Security Council meeting, boy, I tell you what, that was an amazing thing to watch. It was an amazing thing to watch that they sat there, and even the allies of the United States were like, no, absolutely no, zero military intervention of any kind, regardless of this all options on the table crap. Yes, I did. Jedediah Fire, absolutely. He, the representative from Russia, eviscerated Abrams. Elliot Abrams got clobbered. I would have personally apologized for having a convicted felon at a UN Security Council meeting, and he is a convicted felon. Oh, that thing when Pence was speaking, when he said on behalf of Donald Trump, and then just total silence, that was awesome. Yeah, you watched the entire 5-hour meeting. I watched about 2.5, 3 hours of it, and I had to tap out. I think a lot of people in our country underestimate our power. We have had, like, for example, the governor of Wisconsin just pulled his troops from the border. Now imagine that. The leader of the United States sends troops to the border because he thinks they belong there, and the governor of Wisconsin says, nope, not mine. They're coming home. States' rights. I think it was the governor of Texas that there was a guy who killed somebody he found raping his kid, his 5-year-old, and he killed the guy, and he's facing no charges. Way to go, Texas. Way to go, states' rights. I know a lot of people in my audience don't agree with California and the way they do things. You don't have to, but support them in the sense that they stand up to the federal government and tell them no. Any state you see, any event you see where there is a state pushing back, saying, no, federal government, you're not going to do this. Your opinion has been noted, but this is how the people of our state want it to be. You should support that regardless of where you are on the side of whatever that issue is. When we realize the power we have as people to make a difference, and I do truly think, I don't think the Florida Maquis by itself made a difference in this issue with Venezuela, but I think when you combined it with the Empire Files, primarily, Abby Martin, Jimmy Dore, and all of the other voices that stood up and reported the facts. RT reported the facts and didn't get involved in it politically. Nobody did this to try to take down the Trump administration, because this issue went back through many administrations. So we do have the power to make change, as long as we stay focused, as long as we make sure that we have our information right, and we can take our country back, take our states back, and let Florida. Look, I'm not a giant, humongous fan of the guy who's currently the governor of the state of Florida, but I would much rather follow his dictates than anything from DC, because he represents the will of my neighbors. He represents the will of the people that live in Florida. Same thing with Georgia, same thing with Mississippi, same thing with any other country. So anyway, we are 1 hour, 40 minutes. I think I'll go ahead and cut it short there. Like I said, I will drop, once this video is done processing, I'll drop all these links in the description. You can find them there. You guys have a great day. Like, share, subscribe, and we will see you next time. All those who gave money wasn't necessary, but thank you so much. Very much appreciate it. Take care. God bless.